The night air outside the precinct carried a brittle cold, the kind that sharpened every sound. Fluorescent lights washed the concrete in pale white, flattening faces, erasing warmth. A black woman stood near the curb, coat buttoned, hands visible, posture composed. She was waiting. Not loitering. Not arguing. Waiting. A patrol car rolled in slow, tires whispering, engine idling longer than necessary. 2 officers stepped out with practiced boredom, eyes already narrowed, judgment already formed. They looked past the badge on the building and focused on her presence, as if the sidewalk itself had been violated. One officer asked for identification. His voice was clipped, rehearsed. The other hovered, hand near his belt, scanning for a threat he expected to find. She answered calmly. Her name. Her purpose. She was there to meet someone inside. The words landed without weight. The officer repeated the question, louder this time, the way authority does when it wants submission more than clarity. A phone lifted somewhere across the street, unnoticed, its lens steady. They told her to step closer to the wall. She complied. They told her to remove her hands from her pockets, though they were already out. Compliance did not soften them. It sharpened them. The taller officer circled, boots scraping, as if movement alone proved control. He asked where she lived. Why she was there. Whether she had outstanding warrants. Each question slid closer to accusation. When she asked if she was being detained, the air tightened. The shorter officer laughed, a short sound without humor. He said she was being uncooperative. He said she needed to show respect. He said kneel. The word fell heavy, obscene in its casualness. Kneel. Outside a police station. Beneath a camera mounted high on the brick. She hesitated, eyes lifting to the building she knew too well, the procedures inside it, the files, the policies written to prevent moments like this. The hesitation was enough. The command came again, sharper. Kneel. The taller officer placed a hand on her shoulder, guiding, forcing gravity into obedience. She went down slowly, one knee touching concrete, then the other, palms open, breath measured. Humiliation moved through the small crowd that had begun to gather, a ripple of discomfort, of recognition. Someone whispered. Someone else hit record. Traffic passed. A bus exhaled at the corner. Life continued around the stillness of a woman on her knees, framed by uniforms and a building that promised protection. The officers spoke to each other over her head, narrating their authority, citing safety, procedure, respect. None of it was true. All of it was official. She looked straight ahead, jaw set, refusing to collapse inward. She did not plead. She did not shout. Her composure unsettled them more than anger would have. The shorter officer warned her about resisting. The taller one asked if she understood what happens when people don't listen. In the distance, a door inside the station opened and closed. Laughter drifted out, unaware. The woman remained still, the camera across the street unblinking. The moment stretched, uncomfortable, undeniable. This was not an arrest. This was a lesson they believed they were teaching. They did not know who she was. They did not know what she ran. They did not know how close the reckoning already was, waiting just inside those walls, patient, precise, and unavoidable. The lights hummed overhead, indifferent witnesses. Time slowed, then pressed forward. Somewhere, policy met reality. Somewhere, power mistook silence for surrender. And somewhere between the concrete and the camera, a line was crossed that could not be erased by paperwork or apologies. Minutes passed, measured not by clocks but by the officer's impatience. The woman remained kneeling, spine straight, eyes forward, as if balance alone was an act of resistance. One officer radioed in, his tone casual, describing a suspicious individual refusing to cooperate. The words traveled into the system, becoming record before truth had a chance to speak. A small semicircle of onlookers formed. Some pretended to check phones. Others stared openly, faces tight with discomfort. A delivery driver slowed his truck, window down, then shook his head and moved on. No one intervened. Intervention had consequences here. The shorter officer began listing instructions she had already followed. Don't move. Keep your hands visible. Don't look around. Each order overlapped the last, a maze designed to produce failure. When she adjusted her weight to ease the pain in her knees, he barked at her to stay still, voice rising just enough to perform dominance. She asked again, calmly, if she was being detained or arrested. The taller officer ignored the question. He leaned closer, lowering his voice, telling her this would be easier if she stopped acting smart. He said people like her made things complicated for themselves. The phrase hung between them, heavy with implication. A second patrol car arrived, lights flashing briefly before cutting out. 2 more officers stepped into the scene, glancing first at their colleagues, then at the woman on the ground. No questions were asked. The posture told the story they accepted. One officer positioned himself behind her, a silent presence meant to warn rather than protect. Across the street, the phone recording never wavered. Another camera joined it, then another. The glow of screens multiplied, reflecting off windshields and windows. The officers noticed but dismissed it, joking softly about social media lawyers and armchair critics. They had weathered complaints before. Complaints rarely bit back. The woman's breathing stayed even. Inside, calculations moved quickly. She noted badge numbers, unit markings, the exact phrasing of commands. Memory sharpened under pressure. This was not fear. This was preparation. The shorter officer asked her if she understood why she was there. She said she did not, because no reason had been given. He smirked and said her attitude explained everything. He warned her about obstruction. The word was misused, but confidently so, and confidence often passed for legality. Someone in the crowd spoke up, asking why she was on her knees. The taller officer turned, eyes hard, telling the man to move along. The man hesitated, then obeyed. Authority expanded outward, feeding on compliance. The woman felt the roughness of concrete through her pants, the cold seeping upward. She thought of the irony, sharp and almost surreal. Procedures she had reviewed, signed, enforced, were being violated in real time, by men who believed proximity to power made them untouchable. A supervisor was requested over the radio, not out of concern, but to formalize control. The request sounded routine. It was anything but. Each minute added weight, added witnesses, added consequences waiting to be claimed. The officers continued to talk, filling silence with justification. They mentioned safety. They mentioned recent incidents. They mentioned respect. None of it explained kneeling. None of it explained the absence of cause. But explanations were not required when the audience was presumed powerless. The station doors remained closed. Inside, paperwork waited. Inside, files bore her name. Outside, the imbalance held, stretched tight, ready to snap. This was no longer a simple stop. It was an escalation, deliberate and public, built on the assumption that the ground beneath authority would never shift. It drew in the night like a held breath, pulling tension from every corner of the block. Radios crackled, then fell silent, as if even static understood the stakes. A young officer shifted his stance, uncertainty flickering across his face before discipline masked it. He followed orders anyway. The woman's gaze lifted slightly, not defiant, simply observant. She catalogued reactions, the subtle tells of discomfort, the overcompensation of bravado. She had seen this pattern from the other side of a desk, had disciplined versions of it, had written findings that changed careers. Knowing that did not stop the moment, but it anchored her within it. A passerby asked if she needed help. The question was swallowed by a warning to keep moving. The crowd thinned, then thickened again, a tide pulled by curiosity and fear. Someone murmured that this didn't look right. Someone else said it never did. The officers checked their watches. Time was becoming dangerous. Every second increased the chance of a superior noticing, of someone inside recognizing her, of the narrative slipping from their control. They compensated by tightening it, repeating commands, manufacturing non-compliance where none existed. The kneeling continued. Cameras continued. And the quiet certainty settled in, heavy and irreversible, that whatever happened next would not stay here, would not stay small, and would not stay buried. Above it all, the station loomed, brick and glass indifferent. Inside those walls, systems waited to be tested. Outside, a miscalculation deepened. The escalation had reached a point where retreat would require humility, and humility was in short supply. Power held its position, unaware the balance had already shifted, and with each unchallenged command, the cost of stopping grew higher, setting the stage for a reckoning no one present yet fully understood. The moment was locked, irreversible, waiting for authority to answer itself. The supervisor arrived without urgency, stepping out of his vehicle as if responding to paperwork, not a public humiliation unfolding under cameras. He took in the scene in a single glance: the kneeling woman, the clustered officers, the phones raised at the edge of the light. His face showed calculation, not concern. He asked what was going on. The taller officer spoke first, confident, framing the situation as resistance, as attitude, as refusal to comply. Words were chosen carefully, stacked to justify what had already happened. The supervisor nodded slowly, absorbing the version that preserved authority. He turned to the woman and asked her why she was causing a problem. The phrasing assumed guilt. She answered evenly, stating she had followed every instruction and had not been told why she was being detained. Her voice was calm, controlled, professional. It did not match the narrative. The supervisor frowned, not at the officers, but at her composure. He asked again, sharper, demanding identification. She said it was in her coat pocket and asked permission to retrieve it. The request irritated him. He told her to keep her hands where they were. The contradiction went unnoticed by everyone except the cameras. He instructed the officers to maintain control. The phrase carried weight without meaning, a blanket approval that excused excess. One officer adjusted his stance behind her, close enough to intimidate, far enough to deny contact. Another officer blocked the view of one camera, casually, deliberately. The supervisor warned the woman about obstruction and failure to obey lawful orders. The word lawful was used as a shield, not a standard. He cited department policy without naming it, relying on the assumption that policy flowed from his mouth. He told her this could escalate quickly if she didn't cooperate. She asked, for the third time, what crime she was suspected of committing. The supervisor ignored the question. He told her she was being detained for investigation. Investigation of what remained unstated. The omission was not accidental. Vagueness protected them. A young officer shifted uneasily. He had been trained differently, taught about probable cause, about articulable suspicion. He looked at the supervisor, then at the woman, then away. Silence became his compliance. The supervisor ordered her to lower her head. When she did not immediately respond, he interpreted the pause as defiance. His voice rose, carrying authority sharpened by impatience. He threatened cuffs. He threatened transport. He threatened charges that existed only as leverage. The crowd reacted audibly now, murmurs breaking into brief protests before being silenced by glares and warnings. One bystander asked for badge numbers. An officer laughed and turned his body, hiding the number without hiding the intent. The woman lowered her head slowly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of the reality being imposed. Her face remained composed. Inside, each misuse stacked neatly, ready to be documented. This was no longer about a stop. This was about power asserting itself without restraint. The supervisor radioed in an update, repeating the version that favored control. His words became part of the record, transmitted, logged, accepted. Truth lagged behind, waiting for its turn. He instructed an officer to search her bag. She said she did not consent. The supervisor said consent was not required. The search yielded nothing. The absence of evidence did not change their posture. It hardened it. they discussed her in the third person while she remained kneeling, as if distance could erase dignity. They speculated about motives, about intent, about attitude. Each speculation drifted further from fact. None of it was corrected. The supervisor mentioned recent directives about officer safety, stretching them to cover the moment. Safety became the universal justification, elastic enough to excuse anything. He spoke loudly now, for the benefit of the cameras, confident that volume equaled legitimacy. The woman felt the eyes of the crowd, the weight of the moment pressing down. She did not break. She did not rush. She allowed the misuse to fully reveal itself. Authority was documenting its own failure. A call came over the radio, faint but distinct. The supervisor listened, his expression tightening briefly before smoothing out. He responded curtly, assuring control. He did not share the content. He did not need to. The officers continued issuing commands, overlapping, conflicting, impossible to satisfy simultaneously. When she complied with one, they accused her of violating another. The pattern was clear to anyone who had ever reviewed misconduct cases. The pattern was being performed live. The supervisor finally told her she was under arrest for obstruction. The declaration landed flat, unsupported. He did not move to cuff her immediately. The delay was intentional, a pause to assert dominance, to let the word arrest sink in without action. Cameras zoomed in. Phones rose higher. The narrative was slipping. The supervisor sensed it and compensated by tightening control, instructing officers to clear the area. They tried. The crowd resisted just enough to remain visible. Inside the station, a clerk glanced at a monitor, noticing the gathering outside. A name surfaced in memory. A file. A face seen in meetings, in briefings, in corridors of authority. The recognition was slow, then sudden. Outside, the supervisor continued, unaware that the ground beneath his certainty was already cracking. He believed he was closing a situation. In reality, he was sealing evidence. The woman lifted her head slightly, eyes steady. She spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, but with precision. She asked for the name of the supervisor in charge. He gave it, confident. She asked him to repeat it. He did. She nodded once, committing it to memory, though it was already there. The misuse had reached its peak, fully formed, undeniable. Authority had overplayed its hand, and the record was complete. The night held its breath. The moment stood exposed, waiting for the shift that would change everything. The shift began quietly, almost invisibly, the way real reversals do. It did not arrive with shouting or flashing lights. It arrived with a door opening behind the line of officers. A woman stepped out from the station, mid-conversation, phone still at her ear. She stopped when she saw the scene. Her gaze fixed first on the kneeling figure, then on the supervisor, then on the raised phones beyond the lights. Recognition crossed her face, sharp and immediate. She ended the call without a word and walked forward. The supervisor noticed the movement and turned, irritation ready, authority already forming on his lips. He stopped when he saw who it was. His posture changed, subtle but unmistakable. The confidence drained first. The color followed. The woman outside rose slowly from her knees before anyone could stop her. No one touched her. No one ordered her down. Silence spread faster than command ever had. The newcomer addressed the supervisor by name. Her voice was calm, professional, unmistakably senior. She asked what was happening. Not demanded. Asked. The supervisor answered too quickly, repeating his justification, compressing minutes of misconduct into a neat explanation. He spoke faster than before, eyes flicking toward the crowd, toward the cameras, toward the woman who had been kneeling moments earlier. The newcomer listened without interruption. When he finished, she turned to the woman and asked if she was injured. The question alone redrew the balance. The woman answered no. She stood straight now, dignity intact, presence undeniable. The newcomer introduced herself, formally. Title first. Then name. Internal Affairs Division. Director, the word landed like gravity reversing, phones surged upward. Whispers turned electric. One officer took a step back without realizing he had moved. Another lowered his eyes. The supervisor did not move at all. He could not. The director asked again what policy justified the detention. The supervisor opened his mouth and closed it. He cited safety. She asked which subsection. He guessed. She corrected him. She turned to the officers and asked who had given the kneeling command. No one answered. Silence fractured into discomfort. She waited. Waiting was her weapon. The taller officer spoke, quietly now, naming himself. The director acknowledged him and asked for his badge number. He gave it, hands trembling just enough to be seen. She asked for the radio logs. She asked for the body cameras to remain activated. She asked for the names of every officer present. Each request was precise. Each one irreversible. The supervisor tried to regain footing, saying this was being handled. The director corrected him gently, stating it already had been mishandled. She informed him he was relieved pending review. The word pending hung heavier than arrest ever could. She turned to the woman beside her, meeting her eyes with respect. She asked if she wished to file a complaint. The woman said the process was already underway. The director nodded. She knew, around them, authority collapsed inward. Officers who had barked commands moments earlier now stood still, waiting, careful with every movement. The crowd sensed it, the shift from performance to consequence. The director addressed the cameras, not defensively, not apologetically. She stated that an incident had occurred and that it would be investigated fully and publicly. Transparency was not promised. It was assumed. She instructed the officers to clear the sidewalk and assist the public respectfully. The word respectfully landed hard. Compliance followed immediately. The supervisor was escorted inside, not in cuffs, but diminished all the same. His authority had evaporated without spectacle. That was the humiliation he could not escape. The woman who had knelt moments earlier took a slow breath. The concrete no longer held her. The moment had turned, cleanly, decisively. Internal affairs now owned the scene. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They unfolded with the precision of procedure, the kind designed to withstand scrutiny because it was built for it. Within minutes, additional supervisors arrived, summoned not by panic but by protocol. They positioned themselves carefully, aware of the cameras, aware of the shift that had already occurred. The officers involved were separated, instructed to remain on scene, radios collected, body cameras secured as evidence rather than tools. Each action stripped a layer of assumed immunity. The director remained present. That alone unsettled everyone. Internal affairs was not meant to be seen in real time. It was meant to be discovered later, in findings and memos and consequences. Her presence collapsed the distance between misconduct and accountability. She asked the woman to walk with her inside. Not escorted. Walk. The distinction mattered. As they passed the threshold, conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. Recognition spread quietly, urgently. The woman's name moved through the building without sound, carried by memory and disbelief. Inside a conference room, the director closed the door and asked for a detailed account. The woman delivered it without embellishment, without anger, without haste. Times. Commands. Badge numbers. Exact phrasing. The kind of statement investigators rarely received because most people never had the clarity to give it. The director listened, occasionally nodding, occasionally noting a detail that confirmed what she already knew from years of reviewing cases just like this. Outside, the officers waited. Waiting was unfamiliar to them. They stood where they were told, aware that every movement might be replayed, every word already preserved. The taller officer tried to justify his actions to a colleague, then stopped, realizing the sound of his own voice felt incriminating now. The supervisor sat alone in an office he no longer controlled. His radio had been taken. His phone buzzed with messages he did not answer. He stared at a policy manual on the shelf, its spine unbent, its contents suddenly relevant. By morning, the footage was already moving. Clips spread across platforms, stripped of context and then rebuilt with it. Viewers saw the kneeling. They saw the commands. They saw the calm. They saw the reversal. Outrage followed, but not the chaotic kind. This outrage carried receipts. News desks called the department. Statements were drafted, revised, delayed. No one wanted to contradict evidence that could be replayed frame by frame. The director authorized release of body camera footage within policy limits, a move that surprised even seasoned reporters. Transparency was not a concession here. It was strategy. Formal notices went out by midday. The officers directly involved were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The supervisor was reassigned immediately, stripped of field authority. The language was careful, but the message was clear. This was not routine. Internal Affairs initiated parallel reviews, conduct, training adherence, supervisory oversight. Each review widened the circle of accountability. The kneeling was the catalyst, not the endpoint. Union representatives arrived, faces set in practiced neutrality. They requested meetings. They requested delays. They requested caution. The director granted process, not protection. Procedure would be followed. So would evidence. Statements were taken from witnesses, including civilians whose phones had captured what policy cameras had not. Their accounts aligned. The pattern was unmistakable: commands without cause, escalation without justification, humiliation without necessity. The department's legal counsel reviewed the footage in silence. When it ended, no one spoke for several seconds. Liability was no longer hypothetical. It was documented. Days passed, each bringing another layer. Emails surfaced showing previous complaints against the same officers, each dismissed as unfounded, each now recontextualized. Training records revealed gaps. Supervisory notes revealed complacency. The supervisor was interviewed under oath. His answers circled. His confidence did not return. He cited discretion. He cited judgment. Neither held under scrutiny. When asked why the woman was ordered to kneel, he could not articulate a lawful reason. The pause was recorded. The taller officer's interview lasted hours. He justified, then contradicted himself. He referenced policy incorrectly. He blamed misunderstanding. The footage disagreed. The shorter officer said less. Silence became his defense. Silence did not help. Public pressure mounted, but the process did not rush. That restraint mattered. It denied critics the argument of scapegoating. This was accountability, not spectacle. Findings were compiled carefully, line by line. Each violation was cited. Each decision traced. The report did not editorialize. It did not need to. When the conclusions were delivered, they landed with weight. The supervisor was terminated for failure to uphold standards and for directing unlawful actions. The taller officer was dismissed for misconduct and false reporting. The shorter officer received suspension and mandatory retraining, his future conditional on compliance. The younger officer who had hesitated was cleared, his silence noted, his conduct addressed separately through mentorship rather than punishment. The announcements were made publicly. Names were released. Policies were cited. The department acknowledged wrongdoing without qualification. Apologies were issued, not to the abstract public, but to the woman whose dignity had been violated. She accepted the apology without ceremony. Her role was not to forgive. It was to ensure the system corrected itself. Civil proceedings followed, measured and precise. Settlements were discussed. Reforms were negotiated. The department agreed to oversight conditions that would have seemed unthinkable weeks earlier. Inside the building, the mood shifted. Officers spoke more carefully. Supervisors reviewed policies they had skimmed for years. Training sessions took on new urgency. The kneeling became a reference point, a warning, a case study taught without names but with clarity. The director returned to her office, files stacked neatly, work unfinished. Accountability was never a single moment. It was a sustained effort. Outside, the sidewalk returned to normal. The lights hummed as they always had. But something fundamental had changed. Authority now carried memory. Power now carried consequence. The woman walked past the station days later, unnoticed this time, as it should have been. No one stopped her. No one questioned her presence. The concrete held no imprint of knees, but the institution remembered. Justice had not been loud. It had been thorough. The reform did not announce itself as victory. It arrived as policy language, training schedules, revised protocols, and signatures that could not be undone. Within weeks, the department issued a directive clarifying detention standards in unmistakable terms. Kneeling commands were restricted to active arrest scenarios with articulable threat. Non-compliance language was rewritten to remove ambiguity. Supervisory responsibility was expanded, explicitly tying command decisions to personal accountability. Each change referenced failures without naming them, but everyone knew. Mandatory scenario-based training was introduced, replacing outdated lectures with recorded footage from real incidents. Officers were required to watch, pause, and explain what went wrong before being told. The kneeling video was included. Not sensationalized. Studied. Frame by frame, internal affairs procedures were adjusted to allow immediate scene intervention when senior oversight was present. The distance between misconduct and investigation narrowed. Authority learned it could be interrupted. Body camera policy changed as well. Automatic upload triggers were added for prolonged detentions and public commands. Deactivation penalties increased. Cameras became less optional, more institutional memory than equipment. Community oversight gained structure. A civilian review board received expanded access to redacted files, timelines, and disciplinary outcomes. Their recommendations were no longer advisory by default. They required written response. Silence became non-compliance. Supervisors underwent separate certification, focused not on tactics but judgment. Failure to intervene was reframed as participation. Promotions were tied to conduct records, not just years of service. The culture shifted from protection to expectation. The woman reviewed each reform proposal personally. Not as a victim. As a director. She challenged language that softened responsibility. She rejected measures that relied on discretion without guardrails. Her edits were precise, unemotional, final. Public trust did not return overnight. It rarely does. But something steadier replaced outrage, confidence that wrongdoing would not disappear into procedure. Transparency reports were published quarterly. Discipline statistics were released without pressure. The department learned to live with scrutiny. Inside roll calls, the incident was referenced indirectly. "Remember the sidewalk," instructors said. No elaboration needed. Recruits understood. Officers adjusted behavior in small ways first. Clearer explanations. Fewer commands. More pauses. The absence of humiliation became noticeable. That absence mattered. The reform was not perfect. It never is. But it was real, measurable, enforced. And it carried a memory that could not be erased by time or turnover. Authority did not vanish. It matured. The sidewalk outside the station looked ordinary again. Cars passed. Footsteps echoed and faded. No markers remained to signal what had happened there. No plaque, no ribbon, no scar in the concrete. And yet the absence itself carried meaning. The woman walked through the space one last time, not to reclaim it, not to prove anything, but to let it release her. She moved without attention, without recognition, exactly as public space was meant to allow. The power that had once pressed her downward no longer lingered. It had been named, examined, corrected. Inside the department, the case file was closed but never forgotten. It became training material. It became reference. It became a quiet line officers remembered before issuing a command that could not be justified. The memory of accountability now lived where fear once did. The officers who remained learned something no manual could teach: authority survives only when it is restrained by responsibility. Commands carry weight. So do consequences. The difference is who bears them. For the public, the video stopped circulating. Outrage moved on, as it always does. But reform stayed. Policy stayed. Oversight stayed. That endurance mattered more than virality ever could. Justice did not arrive as revenge. It arrived as correction. Calm. Precise. Unavoidable. This story was never about humiliation. It was about exposure. Not of individuals alone, but of a system that revealed itself under pressure and was forced to answer for what it showed. Power was not defeated by shouting or chaos. It was defeated by its own rules, applied without fear, without favoritism, without exception. That is how accountability works when it works at all. And the next time authority pauses before misusing itself, the next time a command is weighed instead of issued, the next time dignity is preserved because someone remembers the cost of ignoring it, that is where this moment continues. Justice does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it simply stands back up.